Las Vegas, 1975. Backstage at the Hilton, the crowd's roar shakes the walls as Elvis Presley lifts his jeweled stage crown. A symbol of glory, applause, and everything he's built. But when little Lisa Marie looks up and asks an innocent question, the king of rock suddenly forgets how to answer. What she said changed him forever. Las Vegas Hilton, March 1975. The dressing room buzzed with energy. The faint hum of amplifiers leaked through the thin backstage walls. The smell of hairspray and leather mixed with the metallic scent of stage lights warming above. Outside those heavy red curtains waited 20,000 fans. Restless, chanting his name in waves that pulsed like thunder. Elvis Presley adjusted the collar of his white jumpsuit, rhinestones scattering the light into 1,000 tiny stars. His assistant, Joe Esposito, checked his belt buckle while the sound tech tested the mic one last time. On the table beside the mirror sat a velvet-lined box. Inside gleamed a golden stage crown, a gift from a fan in Memphis, encrusted with small fake gems that sparkled brighter than their worth. "Take a look at this, honey," Elvis said, his southern drawl soft and amused. He lifted the crown carefully, balancing it on his palm. "See this? This is what they call the king's crown." Lisa Marie stood near the vanity, small enough that her head barely reached the tabletop. Her reflection shimmered beside his in the mirror. His tall frame, her curious eyes. The little girl giggled, running a hand over the rhinestones. "It's shiny," she said. Elvis smiled, that same crooked grin that had disarmed millions. "Shiny, yeah. Daddy wears it when he wants to remind folks who's boss." He placed it gently on his head and struck a playful pose. The room burst into laughter. Even the makeup artist, Sheila Ryan, chuckled. For a moment, the tension of the show melted into warmth. But Lisa's laughter faded. Her eyes lingered on the crown. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Why do you need a crown if everyone already knows you're loved?" The question hung in the air like feedback from a dead mic. Joe looked up. Sheila froze mid-brushstroke. Elvis blinked, caught completely off guard. He lowered the crown slowly, staring at his daughter as if hearing her from miles away. The man who'd faced screaming crowds, flashing cameras, and a lifetime of adoration suddenly felt speechless. He set the crown down on the vanity, his reflection now split between glitter and glass. Outside, the announcer's voice echoed through the hallway. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Elvis Presley." The crowd erupted. Yet, inside that small room, time seemed to stop. Elvis turned to Lisa, kneeling to her level. "That's a good question, darlin'," he said, voice trembling with something more honest than Showtime nerves. "Maybe sometimes we forget that love doesn't need a crown." She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. The noise of the audience faded to a distant storm. For a few seconds, there was no king, no legend, only a father realizing that the truest kind of love doesn't need applause. He stood, straightened his cape, and glanced once more at the golden crown resting silently on the vanity. The light from the mirror caught its edge, throwing a thin gleam across his face. Then, with a quiet exhale, Elvis left the crown behind and walked toward the curtain. The stage manager called out, "You're on, boss." Elvis didn't answer. He adjusted his microphone, touched the scarf around his neck, and whispered to himself, "Let's make her proud." As the curtains rose and the crowd exploded in sound, Lisa's question still echoed in his mind, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes the brightest lights come from the smallest voices. The crowd's roar spilled down the hallway, a thunderstorm of devotion shaking the mirrors in the dressing room. But Elvis Presley stood frozen, eyes fixed on the small handprint Lisa had left on the vanity's edge. Her question, so light, so innocent, had cracked. Something open inside him. "Why do you need a crown if everyone already loves you?" He whispered the words to himself, as if testing how they felt on his tongue. Around him, the noise of the world kept moving. Joe Esposito's footsteps, the muffled shout of stagehands, the countdown to showtime. But Elvis wasn't in Las Vegas anymore. He was somewhere else. Somewhere quieter, somewhere painfully human. For the first time that evening, he didn't feel like the king. He felt like a man being held accountable by a child who saw through the smoke and flash. Joe appeared in the doorway. "EP, they're waitin', man. We gotta move." Elvis nodded but didn't move. His fingers traced the rim of the crown, the cool metal grounding him. "Joe," he murmured. "You ever think about what all this means? The lights, the fans, they—" He stopped, words dissolving before they found shape. Joe frowned, half concerned, half confused. "You're overthinking again, boss. Let's just give 'em the show." Elvis smiled faintly. "Yeah, the show." He looked back at Lisa, now humming softly to herself near the mirror, swinging her legs in rhythm only she could hear. "She just asked me something, Joe. Simple question, but it hit like a bullet." Lisa's eyes caught his again, unaware of the storm she'd started. "You okay, Daddy?" He crouched down, his white jumpsuit creasing at the knees. "I'm okay, baby. You just made Daddy think a little harder tonight." She nodded, smiling the way only a daughter can when she doesn't yet understand what love costs. Then, almost on instinct, he reached for the scarf on his table. A deep blue one gifted by a fan the night before. He tied it loosely around his wrist instead of his neck. Something small, something symbolic. A reminder. As he rose, the announcer's voice thundered again from beyond the curtain. "The king of rock and roll!" The audience screamed. The floor vibrated. Every light in the Hilton seemed to pulse. But Elvis didn't rush this time. He turned to Lisa, pressing the scarf to her tiny hand. "You keep this safe for me, all right?" Lisa frowned. "Aren't you gonna wear it?" He shook his head. "Not tonight." Then he walked toward the stage entrance, each step heavy, like crossing from one world to another. As he disappeared into the flood of noise, Lisa looked back at the vanity. The crown still sitting there untouched, its rhinestones reflecting her face instead of his. She tilted her head, curious, and whispered, "You don't need it, Daddy. You already shine." Her words barely rose above the music starting to build. Backstage, Sheila Ryan wiped her eyes. "She's got your heart, EP," she whispered to no one in particular. The spotlight cracked open. Elvis stepped into it, greeted by a tidal wave of sound. He sang, but something in his voice had changed. Slower, heavier, sincere. The orchestra followed his lead, unaware they were witnessing a man recalibrating his soul mid-song. Each lyric rolled out not like performance but confession. And while 20,000 fans cheered their idol, one little girl's words kept echoing inside him, reminding him what crowns could never buy. Sometimes, truth doesn't arrive in thunder. It arrives in a whisper. The show ended with thunder. 20,000 fans screamed his name like a single heartbeat, pounding through the hotel walls. The final note of "Can't Help Falling in Love" hung in the air, trembling between glory and exhaustion. Elvis Presley bowed once, twice, then turned away from the lights. But instead of heading to the after-party suite or the press pit, he slipped quietly down a narrow backstage corridor, where the noise began to fade. Only the distant hum of the band packing up filled the space. The air was cooler here, tinged with dust and electricity. He unhooked the microphone, its cable dragging behind like a tail, and walked until he found silence. Every step echoed. The king of rock and roll was alone. "Joe?" he called softly. No reply, only the faint click of typewriter keys from an office somewhere. He stopped beside a cracked dressing room mirror, one of those old ones left behind from the Hilton's renovation years earlier. His reflection looked different now. The cape drooping off one shoulder, makeup smudged near his eyes, sweat glittering like tears. He thought of Lisa's question. "Why do you need a crown if everyone already loves you?" The words returned again, gentle yet piercing, threading through the hallway like a melody he couldn't shake. A door creaked open behind him. Joe Esposito appeared, holding a towel. "You okay, boss?" Elvis didn't answer right away. He took the towel, rubbed his face, and nodded toward the stage entrance. "Did you see her?" "She was watchin' from the curtain." Joe smiled. "Yeah, she waved when you bowed. Whole band saw her." Elvis chuckled softly. "That little girl. She's got more sense than all of us." Joe leaned against the wall. She's just a kid, E. She don't mean nothin' by it. Elvis turned, his voice low but steady. She meant everything by it. The silence stretched again, thicker this time. The kind that makes a man face himself. He walked further down the hall until he reached the side stage door leading to the loading bay. Beyond it, night stretched over the desert, silent, endless. Neon from the Hilton sign flickered red and blue against the pavement. For once, there were no cameras. No spotlights. Just a man staring at the quiet truth of his own life. He remembered nights on tour, sleeping on buses, hiding behind sunglasses, pretending exhaustion was devotion. He called it duty. Maybe it was vanity. Maybe both. He whispered, "She doesn't see the king. She just sees her daddy." Joe looked at him carefully. "You're thinking too hard again." Elvis smiled faintly. "That's the first time someone's accused me of that." They both laughed. A soft, tired laugh that carried more truth than words could. Down the hallway, Lisa's small footsteps echoed. "Daddy!" He turned. Her hair was messy from running, eyes shining with excitement. She held his blue scarf in both hands. "You forgot this." He knelt down, taking it gently. "You kept it safe for me, huh?" She nodded. "I told you, you already shine." He pulled her into a hug, pressing his forehead against hers. "You're something else, baby." The faint murmur of fans outside still drifted through the walls, but now it felt distant, like another lifetime. When he stood again, Lisa's words had already taken root. The sound of applause no longer thrilled him the same way. Instead, it reminded him of everything he wanted to protect, everything that couldn't be found under spotlights. He took her hand and began walking back toward the dressing room. The crown still waited on the vanity, gleaming under the mirror lights. Elvis looked at it one last time. Then he reached out and closed the box. The snap of its latch echoed like a final note. Sometimes, the loudest applause comes from silence. The following night, the Hilton showroom pulsed with anticipation. The marquee outside flashed, "Elvis Presley, live in Las Vegas." Cameras lined the aisles. Reporters filled the first rows. Everyone expected another glittering coronation. But backstage, something was missing. The gold crown still sat locked inside its velvet box. Elvis glanced at the empty spot where it once gleamed on the vanity. The absence felt heavier than the crown itself. Joe Esposito tightened his headset and leaned in. "You sure you don't want the crown, boss? Folks love that shot at the encore." Elvis shook his head. "Not tonight." Joe studied him, then nodded. He'd learned long ago not to argue when Elvis spoke in that low, certain tone, the one that came from somewhere deeper than showbiz. The band tuned up. Brass, strings, and gospel voices hummed through the speakers. The house lights dimmed. The crowd's roar swelled like a wave ready to break. Elvis adjusted his mic, straightened his cape, and whispered to himself, "Do it for her." The curtain lifted. A flash of light hit his face, washing him in silver. The audience exploded, 20,000 people rising to their feet. But this time his head was bare. No crown. No golden shimmer. He raised his hands in greeting. For a second, confusion rippled through the crowd. Where was the symbol? The signature? But then he began to sing. The first notes of "If I Can Dream" filled the room, and the energy changed. It wasn't the usual showman's blast. It was something raw, trembling, almost prayerful. He sang like a man searching for redemption in every lyric. Each line came slower, fuller, charged with something unseen. His voice cracked once, barely noticeable, but the orchestra felt it. They softened, letting him lead. Backstage, Lisa Marie watched through the narrow gap in the curtain, her small hands gripping the edge. She didn't notice the missing crown. She noticed the way her father smiled between verses, gentler, freer. Joe whispered to the lighting tech, "He's doing something different tonight." Elvis closed his eyes during the final chorus. His voice rose, not to impress, but to confess. When he hit the last word, "Comes true," right now, the entire arena went dead silent. That silence lasted longer than applause ever had. Then, one by one, people stood. Not screaming this time, just standing. Respectfully. Moved. Elvis bowed once, then looked toward the curtain where Lisa peeked out. He gave a small nod, almost invisible to the crowd but clear to her. She smiled and waved, and for a fleeting second, the king of rock looked like any proud father on earth. When he turned to leave the stage, he didn't take his usual victory stride. He walked slowly, deliberately, soaking in the faces. Not fans, people, souls. As he stepped into the shadow of the backstage lights, the applause followed him like a tide rolling back to shore. He took a deep breath, wiping sweat from his brow. Joe met him at the wings. "Boss," Joe said softly, "that might have been your best show." Elvis smiled faintly. "Funny thing, Joe. First show I did without the crown." Joe laughed. "Guess you didn't need it after all." Elvis nodded, glancing back toward the glowing stage. "Nah. Turns out the light comes from somewhere else." He looked down the hall. Lisa was running toward him, arms open. He knelt, catching her mid-sprint. The crowd still thundered beyond the curtains, but in that moment, nothing compared to the quiet joy of her embrace. Sometimes the most powerful crown a man can wear is the one love places in his heart. The roar faded first, then the lights. When the curtain finally dropped, only the hiss of amplifiers remained. Elvis stood still in the half-dark, breathing heavy. Sweat ran down his temple, dripping onto the blue scarf Lisa had returned to him. He smiled, small, tired, genuine. Joe Esposito handed him a bottle of water. "You killed it, E." Elvis took a slow sip. "Felt different tonight." "How so?" He looked toward the empty stage. "Didn't feel like they were cheering the king. Felt like they were listening to the man." He walked back to the dressing room. The air smelled of hairspray and cologne, but the mirror no longer shimmered like it used to. The crown box still sat there, unopened. For a long time he just stared at it, the velvet catching the low light. "She was right," he murmured. Joe frowned.
"Lisa."
"Yeah," said, "I didn't need this to be loved." He traced the edge of the box with one finger. "I've been wearing this weight for too long." Across the room, Lisa's small voice called out, "Daddy, you were amazing." She ran up, still wearing her tiny hotel pass on a string around her neck. Elvis scooped her up, spinning once until they both laughed. "You liked it?" he asked. She nodded fiercely. "You didn't wear the shiny hat." Elvis chuckled. "Guess I didn't need it, huh?" Lisa pressed her palm to his cheek. "Nope, you already shine. Remember?" He froze for a moment, caught between pride and humility. Then he hugged her tighter, whispering, "You keep reminding me of that." Joe watched quietly, pretending to sort papers so he wouldn't intrude. The room softened, the kind of silence that means peace, not emptiness. When Lisa dozed off on the couch, Elvis finally reached for the crown box. He opened it one last time. The gold caught a stray beam from the hallway light. Each rhinestone reflected tiny fragments of himself, hundreds of little Elvises staring back. For years he'd believed that sparkle was glory. Tonight he saw it for what it really was, distraction. He closed the lid gently and set the box aside. "Joe," he said, "lock this up in storage. Don't bring it out again." Joe hesitated. "You sure? That's history right there." Elvis smiled. "History's made out there," he said, nodding toward the stage. "But life's made in here. Sometimes the man behind the legend is the only one who knows which one is real." As Joe carried the crown away, Elvis looked at Lisa, now asleep under his stage jacket. He whispered to himself, "All this noise, and she's the quiet that keeps me sane." He turned off the vanity lights one by one until only the hallway glow remained. The last bulb flickered, throwing one soft flash across the now empty table. He smiled. "That's enough light for me." Years passed, but that crown never left the velvet box again. It gathered a thin film of dust in the Graceland archives, tucked behind stage costumes and gold records. To the world, it was another glittering artifact. But to those who knew, it was something else. a reminder of the night Elvis Presley chose love over legend. After Elvis's passing in 1977, Joe Esposito found the box while helping catalog his belongings. Inside was a note written in Elvis's unmistakable scrawl, "For Lisa, you taught me what shines for real." Joe folded the note carefully and placed it back inside before handing the box to Priscilla. Neither spoke. There were no words big enough for what that crown meant now. Years later, in 1982, Graceland opened its doors to the public. Among the stage suits and gold records, visitors noticed a small glass case. Inside it, that very crown. No plaque described its story. Only a single line engraved beneath. A Father's Lesson, 1975. Every day, fans leaned close to the glass, whispering theories. Some said it was a symbol of humility. Others believed it marked the moment Elvis redefined greatness. But Lisa Marie knew the truth. In a quiet 1999 interview, she smiled when asked about it. "Daddy didn't wear it again after that night," she said softly. "He told me the crown looked better on the people who loved him. I think he meant we gave it back." The interviewer leaned in. "Do you remember what you said to him?" Lisa hesitated, eyes glistening. "I told him he didn't need a crown to shine." For a moment, the studio fell silent. Even the audio engineer stopped moving. That clip would later resurface online, becoming one of the most watched Elvis interview moments of all time. Comment sections filled with strangers writing, "This made me cry," or, "Now I see Elvis as a father, not just a star." Every decade seems to rediscover that single exchange, father and daughter backstage in Vegas, the moment when a global icon learned something a child already knew. If you visit Graceland today, you'll still find it. The crown resting beneath glass, its rhinestones dulled with time but not forgotten. Beside it lies a small photograph. Lisa on his lap, both smiling, no spotlight, no glitter. Tour guides sometimes whisper. He called that the night he truly felt free. And for those who linger long enough, they'll see something beyond the gold. Reflection. Their own faces caught in the glass beside the king's. Maybe that's what Elvis wanted, for everyone to see their own light shining back at them. The story of Elvis Presley isn't only about stages, gold records, or flashing lights. It's about one quiet moment backstage. A father, a daughter, and a crown that would never be worn again. Long after the applause faded, that conversation kept echoing across generations. In the end, the king didn't conquer the world by shouting louder. He did it by listening deeper. When Lisa asked, "Why do you need a crown if everyone already loves you?" she wasn't questioning fame. She was defining love. Real love doesn't sparkle. It stays even when the lights go out. Every great legend eventually meets a truth that humbles him. For Elvis, it wasn't a critic or a rival. It was a 6-year-old child holding a mirror that reflected his heart instead of his image. He listened, and that changed everything. If you walk through Graceland today, you can almost hear it. The faint echo of a laugh, a melody lingering in the air, and a reminder whispered through time. You don't need a crown to shine, because long before the legend ended, the man inside the music finally understood that the brightest crown is invisible, made of truth, humility, and love. And that, perhaps, is what made Elvis Presley not just the king of rock and roll, but the king who listened. If the story moved you, share it with someone who still believes fame defines greatness. Let them hear what Lisa taught her father, that love outlasts applause. Subscribe for more untold legends that prove humanity is the truest kind of spotlight.